Well, thanks, Chris, for joining us. Chris is one of the preeminent masters of science fiction and fantasy illustration. So thanks again for joining me, Chris.
Uh, well, thanks for asking me.
So where did it all begin? Where did the idea to be an artist first sort of germinate?
I don't know, really. I just when I was at primary school,
Hmm.
I wanted to be a commercial artist. That's all I know. It's almost like I was born to do it, really.
Yeah. Were your family supportive of the idea?
They weren't unsupportive,
Yeah.
My dad, I think, would have preferred it if I'd gone into some kind of more a more structured, kind of ordered, predictable career.
Yeah.
Um, but it was entirely my choice to go down the route I
Hmm.
went down. And I was an only child as well. So,
Yeah.
all their eggs were in one basket, really.
Right. Well, you went to art college, didn't you?
Yeah, I went to Doncaster to
Hmm.
start. And then I went to Maidstone for 3 years. I
Hmm.
did a pre-diploma at Doncaster. And that was okay. I will resist the temptation to digress. But it was okay. Then I went to Maidstone, and I was allowed to do pretty much what I wanted to do at Maidstone. We all did the odd sort of graphic design thing and
Hmm.
stuff like that, but it was quite clear that I wanted to be an illustrator, and that's where my sort of talents lay. And there was a chap who became a bit of a mentor, a chap called Gerald Rose, who unfortunately I discovered died a couple of years ago. But he was brilliant. He was a very well-known children's book illustrator,
Hmm.
and he could see where I was going, and was very helpful, very encouraging. Um, and then I went to the Royal College of Art for 3 years,
Hmm.
which I've written about at great length in a journal that I've just been writing. It was such a wild time in the late 60s, sorry,
Hmm.
early 70s, and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff going on, which health and safety wouldn't allow now.
Right.
There was the college boat race, which occurred on the Serpentine, where we hired all the boats
Right.
from the marina, and they all congregated up at the Lancaster Gate end. And at a given signal by Christopher Cornford, the purser at the college, the bursar, sorry, um, he fired a starting pistol, and everybody rode like buggery down towards the other end of the Serpentine.
Hmm.
But the rest of the college, there must have been maybe 80 people in the boats, something
Hmm.
like that. But the rest of the college, 220 people, were all gathered on the bridge with bags of soot and cloth and flour and whatever. And it was brilliant. All the boats got sunk. So several people used to go to hospital every year, sort of
It's,
teeth missing or something like that.
it's very difficult to get into the Royal College of Art at the time, wasn't it?
It was, yeah, there were 10 places for 300 applicants. That's what There was always a shroud of mystery around this because um, I actually went to there was a thing where we helped gather people's portfolios together
Hmm.
for the members of staff to look at. And I did amongst other kids, we did the painting school. And there weren't that many applications. There were probably 200 or so
Mm.
for 15 places, maybe, something like that. But the proportion in illustration and graphic design, illustration, there were 10 to 12 students. And we were told that there were 300 applicants.
Mm.
So it was 1 in 30 chance of getting in.
Right. What do you think you learned from your time at college?
I learned to get quick.
Right.
I learned that I just sort of I discovered an airbrush.
Mm.
Chap who is now professor at the Royal College, Dan Fern, who was a couple of years ahead of me, and he'd done some airbrushing stuff, and I went and asked him about it, and he gave me the college airbrush, told me about a company on the south coast called Conopoise, who made really good airbrushes. So I got myself a Conopoise and set about learning. Essentially, it was Frisk film that was the main ingredient,
Mm.
because you could build up a picture like painting by numbers using Frisk film.
Yeah.
And you could buy that in any art shop. It was just a low-tack adhesive film, which you applied to the board, having drawn out your design to start with. And then you just cut out with a scalpel all the little bits
Mm.
that you wanted to apply the color to, and built your picture up
Mm.
literally stage by stage like that. It was, I took to it like a duck to water, really.
Yeah.
And at that time, most of the other kids in my year were spending time either in their flats or in the college hostel where they stayed. And they were working from home essentially. Um, and they would just come in for criticisms and the odd kind of meal and things like that.
Yeah.
So I was the only one really in my year that attended on a consistent basis.
Mm.
And I had the whole place to myself, really. So I had different jobs coming from graphic design students because they were wanting various different things producing. And I'd go and I'd do an illustration for whatever project they were working on. And it was a very useful way of learning my trade.
Mm.
There were lots of guys wanting lots of stuff, and I was churning it out.
Yeah.
It was really good, and it was a very good a way of actually getting used to working quickly and efficiently.
Yeah. Well, it was there that you met Michael Morris, wasn't it?
Yes, well, when I left the Royal College, I didn't have an awful lot to do with Mike when we were at college. He was in graphics and I did illustration. And there were lots of very funny stories associated with graphics. Not so many in illustration because there was hardly anybody ever there.
Yeah.
But graphics, they all attended and they did amazing things. Um, they did one project they did, I must tell you about. They did a project, they designed a symbol for mankind.
Mm.
And there was a guy, Ron Vandermeer, who went off to the sculpture school and he made this enormous thing on out of plaster of Paris. It was an erect penis,
Right.
6 foot long, with one end of it was a gun butt, and the other end of it was this horrendous thing, you see. And in order to get it criticised, he he put it on a trolley and trundled off out of Queensgate, where the sculpture school was, onto Cromwell Road, along the front of the Natural History Museum,
Right.
and up up Exhibition Road to the graphics department. And as he was going up Exhibition Road, there was a party of school children waiting to go into the Geological Museum, chaperoned by a bunch of nuns. And Ron was quite happily whistling away, trundling this thing up the street, to the absolute horror of these nuns who quickly ordered their children to face the wall and look away. It was, you couldn't make it up, actually. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
That's all right. So Michael Morris.
Yeah, Michael and I, we got together towards the end of our time at the Royal College and decided it'd be a good idea to form a company. And because there were lots of cheap places for rent in Covent Garden. And I was approached by a chap called Ken Burgess, who was running a small advertising agency in Covent Garden. And he had desk space there. So Mick and I took desk space. I think he charged us £5 a week, something like that.
Yeah.
And we set up with another chap called Brian Delaney, who left shortly after. The first job we did together was a record cover for Steel Eye Span. And so Brian got his name on the credits on the back of the album, although he'd just left.
Right.
He went to go and work with a chap called Darrell Ireland, who was another Geordie. It's the Geordies stick together, you know.
Yeah.
And they were quite successful, as were we. You know, we used to do lots of book covers, record covers, and Mick did. Essentially, we worked on ideas together, and Mick did the type, and I did the pictures. And sometimes we'd use photography. Other times I produced an illustration for the job. But it was all to do with coming up with the right solution for whatever job we received, you know.
Yeah.
And it worked very well for about 10 years. You know, about 8 years it was, from 1972 to 1980.
Yeah.
Roughly. And we parted very amicably. I was starting to get more work than Mick, and there was a discrepancy in that a lot of the stuff that Michael was doing was ordering typography and photography. So to cobble things together in a design thing. So, in other words, design incurred more expenses than illustration.
Yeah.
Illustration, you just got a piece of board, some ink, and a brush or an airbrush, and away you go, you know. Whereas there were lots of expenses associated with the design work, ordering typography and the like. So we gradually realised that it was just becoming unbalanced.
Yeah.
I was getting more work than Mick was. So we amicably decided to part company. And I started working from home in Lewisham. Bought my first house.
Yeah.
And went to work from home. Which was
When did the science fiction work start to come in?
Well, this came from a chap called Peter Bennett, who's still a good friend of mine, actually. he's retired now, lives in Bexhill.
Mm.
And he was art director at Magnum Paperbacks at the time. And he said, I want to try you on some science fiction work. To which I replied, you must be crazy. I don't know anything about science fiction, you know.
Mm.
He said, oh, I think you'd be really good at it. And I said, well, yeah, I'll have a go, you know, in for a penny, in for a pound sort of thing. And so he gave me a couple of Philip K. Dick covers to do. I did them. They were pretty terrible. But one looked like it had a spaceship on it that looked like the poster for Jaws,
Right.
which was very funny. Um, then I got one because I'd seen 2001, so
Mm.
I had a keen interest in science fiction, but not the literature.
Yeah.
Um, I'd seen 2001 and Silent Running and various other films like that. And so I was very keen on the notion of it.
Mm.
Um, and the first cover I did was for an Alpha Besta book called what was it called now?
Extra.
Extra, absolutely. And I told you before that I was asked to sign a copy of this
Oh
at
yeah, tell us that story. It's a really good story, that.
a science fiction convention because there are people who wander around with suitcases full of books
Mm.
for guys like me to sign copies of the book. And he got this one of Extra, wanted me to sign it. And I opened it up, and Alfred Bester had already signed it. And he'd written, if there was ever a book I didn't want to sign, it was this book. So I just wrote ditto and signed my name and went away quite happy, I think. But yeah, so and Mick and I, as I say, we parted company. I went to work from home, and I was doing record covers, book covers, whatever I was asked to do, really.
Yeah.
My reputation grew from that. I must admit, I was slightly nervous about moving out of central London
Mm.
because there was an aspect of working in Covent Garden at that time where you you were right there where it was all happening.
Yeah.
A lot of other designers, artists, illustrators working around Covent Garden because the rents were so cheap.
Yeah.
You could park. You could park your car outside, you know,
Yeah.
without any problem because they couldn't make separate rules for the market and for guys like us.
Yeah.
There were no yellow lines anywhere,
Right.
you know, because they couldn't restrict the parking for the market traders,
Yeah.
so they couldn't restrict it for us. So no, it was great for about 3 years or so. It
Mm.
was fantastic. Um, then, as I say, I moved out, took a took a sharp intake of breath, and made myself a studio at home. When I had the energy to do it,
Mm.
um, and you know, carried on really.
Yeah. What was some of the album covers that you did?
I had one the other day actually that somebody reminded me of. It was a album called Vigilante by Magnum.
Right.
Not a lot of people heard of Magnum, but they were quite big in the 70s.
Mm.
And there's apparently a group of people who are still fans of the band,
Yeah.
despite the fact that the lead singer has just died a short while ago. And I did a picture of uh, a unicorn in a pink marble room,
Mm.
and they wanted this unicorn, which was they wanted a unicorn, you know,
Yeah.
I couldn't see the sense in it myself, but there you go. They wanted a unicorn, and they wanted a psychedelic eagle attacking it.
Right.
And I said, well, why do you want a psychedelic eagle attacking it? And he said, well, it's good and evil. Well, I said, what do you mean good and evil? Well, the unicorn's a symbol for goodness and the eagle's a symbol of evil. And I said, well, I don't really agree with that.
Mm.
No, I don't think that a unicorn necessarily a symbol for good. And I don't think an eagle is an evil thing either, really. So, and they said, well, that's what we want to do, you know. I said, well, I said, well, what about this for an idea? You've got your pink marble room. Across through the window, through the archway, you see this spiral galaxy in the sky. It's daylight, but you can still see this spiral galaxy. And then there's a range of mountains with a lake. And in
Mm.
the lake, you've got a whirlpool. So you've got a spiral galaxy and a whirlpool in the lake.
Mm.
And into the room, you've got a spiral mosaic in the floor. And then in the corner, you've got an old-fashioned record player with a record on it, which is another spiral, you know.
Mm.
So you've got a link between your record on an old record player and a galaxy out in space, you know.
Yeah.
Fantastic cosmic link. And I thought it was a terrific idea, you know.
Mm.
They just sort of went, well, what about the eagle, you know? I said, well, it's difficult to get a spiral into an eagle, really, you know. I don't see how you could do it. And eventually I said, look, I think you need to get somebody else for the job, you know, because clearly we're not seeing eye to eye at this. And I didn't fancy doing an eagle attacking a unicorn, you know. It
Yeah.
seemed to be, and all their previous covers had been done by Rodney Matthews.
Mm.
He was their sort of go-to artist. And if you check on Wikipedia, the information about this album, it says that they wanted Rodney Matthews to do this cover as well, but the record company decided on somebody else,
Right.
which was me. So anyway, apparently it still gets quite a bit of interest
Yeah.
in the Magnum fandom, you know, because it was one of their better covers, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can find it on Wikipedia, I think, if you type in Magnum
Yeah.
and Vigilante, it's called.
Okay. So let's say someone comes to you with a book cover commission. How much research would you do into the source material? Let's say it's a novel or something like that.
Um, Sometimes you'd read it.
Mm.
Sometimes you'd basically, if it was Mick and myself, we'd get a synopsis.
Mm.
Publisher would supply you with a synopsis, which is a kind of abbreviated version of the book and itemizing the various important points, you know.
Yeah.
It'll give you an idea as to whether it's, you know, a detective novel or a cowboy book or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And then you'd sit and brainstorm it, sit there with a sketch pad apiece
Yeah.
and quickly sketch out, what do you think of this? Do you think this could work? And do you think that could work? You know, and you'd sort of over about a half an hour or so, you'd work out something that you thought could work quite well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, Mick was very good at that. He once went to David Pelham at I think it was David Pelham, yeah, at Penguin Books, and they were doing a series of sociology books, and one that was first one they were going to do was on homosexuality,
Right.
and quick as a flash, Mick just said, I know what I'm going to do for that. And David Pelham said, oh, yeah. Said, yeah, you know what the male symbol is, a symbol of a circle with an arrow pointing out.
Mm.
Well, I'm going to do a circle with the arrow pointing in and make it pink. And David Pelham said, brilliant. Don't bother with the artwork. We'll do that. Just invoice it, you know.
So how would your workflow normally go? So after you've made the initial sketches and you come up with a an idea you're going to go with, how do you go about transferring that to canvas or board?
I do a drawing
Hmm.
of how I think the finished cover would go.
Yeah,
And I do it at the same size as the finished cover. So I could see whether various ingredients would actually work or not.
yeah,
And then I'd fax that to the art director. The art director would invariably just say, yeah, great, do it. But occasionally they'd say, well, can you make that bigger, or can you change that for something else?
hmm.
And then you just go straight to artwork. So I had a photocopier that I could do things twice up. I
Hmm.
mean, enlarge things twice up. So I'd use the photocopier, blow my original picture up to twice the size,
Hmm.
and then draw out a board of the finished size, which would be twice the cover size. Um, and then just trace it down, redraw the thing in detail,
Hmm.
pencil, and then cover it with frisk film and start painting. You know,
Yeah.
it's a very quick process. Um, I used to use inks a lot, which were fugitive. So once they started with liquid acrylics, I moved very rapidly to using those. They were brilliant colors in the same way. But what was really good about them was that they blended perfectly with Liquitex paint, you know, the paint in tubes.
Yeah.
So, so you could do a lot of the picture using spray,
Hmm.
and the detail, if you wanted to put detail in, yeah, if you use gouache, it looks different. It settles on the picture different. It
Yeah.
goes, it's got a matte finish to it, you know, which I never liked. So I got to using Liquitex acrylics.
Hmm.
I still do. That's essentially the medium that I use.
Hmm. How long would it take um, to do a cover? I know it varies cover by cover, but roughly.
Well, I've done a cover in a lunchtime.
Right.
The art director showed up at 11 o'clock. Said, "I got this cover I want you to do." I said, "Come back at 1 o'clock and I'll have it for you." You know.
Hmm.
So that was basically a cloud with a flash of lightning coming out of it.
Hmm.
Other covers, they would take no more than 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
Um, if you took longer than that, you weren't earning any money really.
Yeah.
It was at the top of um, my earning, I was earning about £1,000 a week, something like that.
Oh, pretty cool.
And if you know, if you get maybe £400 or £500 for a cover, sometimes you could get up to £1,200, depending on who it was for.
Hmm.
And of course, there's the second rights. You can usually make a little bit of money on second rights on certain covers, but essentially, there's a finite limit to how much you can earn.
Yeah.
And guys who work in film, um, the likes of Alan Lee and John Howe and people like that, they make a lot more money because they're being paid by the film company. But the main trouble with working for film is that you don't actually own anything that you produce.
Yeah.
All owned by the film company.
Would you
Where
typically keep the copyright then on a painting?
yes,
Yeah.
yes, you always keep the copyright.
Yeah.
Um, the only time I think doing stuff for the States, they tend to buy out the copyright.
Right.
Um, they inaugurate something called a total buyout, which they pay you more money, but they own the thing lock, stock, and barrel. I did a post. I think it was might have been a point of sale or something for Glaxo, but it was a robot answering a telephone,
Hmm.
and that was a total buyout. I think it was something like $17,000 for that.
Well,
Which is it's a good fee,
yeah.
but they own it, lock, stock, and barrel. Having said that, I've used it for self promotion a few times.
Are there any book covers that you really liked? Do you have any favourite ones?
Um, a lot of the Philip K. Dick stuff, HarperCollins, I enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
There was one. They did I did a series of um, his short stories, which there are 5 volumes, I think, and I really enjoyed doing those. Second variety, the Little Black Box. Beyond lies the wub, whatever that means. Um, and We Can Build You, I think, is another one. But in fact, some of the short stories have been made into movies because I think Minority Report was a short story.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
Um, but and I've done, of course, I did Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep.
Yeah.
That was quite a nice one to do. And a lot of the stuff that you do of that nature, it relies on the fact that it's a good vehicle for your work.
Yeah.
It's a nice job to do.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time doing it. You know,
Well, going back to the film stuff, so you did some wallpaper designs, didn't you, for the Star Wars film?
it was for The Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was. I was a bit miffed actually. I got 3,500 quid for that, and they flew me out to Los Angeles to Lucasfilm.
Hmm.
It was cheaper to send me over there with the artwork than for somebody from there to come over. Well, for George Lucas to come and check the characterization of the people on the wallpaper design.
Hmm.
So, but it sold. It was for Crown wall coverings, I think, originally.
Yeah.
And it sold 6 million rolls in the first week.
Wow. That's
That's 6.5 quid a roll. So work that out.
yeah.
30 odd million quid. And I got 3,500.
Have you been asked to do any other film work at all?
I was approached by Stanley Kubrick to work on AI,
Hmm.
and but it never materialized. It, I think, I remember I didn't tell you this before, but I went on holiday to Italy My wife and I went to stay in this sort of villa type place up in the mountains in
Hmm.
Umbria. And some of the other guests staying in this place were there was a lord and lady, there was, there were kind of rich people.
Yeah.
Not that we were, but they were rich people. And one of the ladies there was a a Hollywood agent,
Hmm.
and she knew of Stanley Kubrick. I don't think she represented him, but she said, I know for sure that Stanley is not commissioned or not contracted to produce a science fiction film."
Hmm.
And then he went on to produce Eyes Wide Shut, I
Hmm.
think. And then he died.
Hmm.
Um, my involvement was I went up and met him, and I was quite impressed by the fact that he was wearing odd socks at the time
Hmm.
and a jumper with holes in it. Um, and then I did some sketch work on the idea of it. A chap called Brian Aldiss was commissioned by Stanley Kubrick to write the screenplay for AI.
Hmm.
And he struggled for 2 years with the concept. And it was at that point that I got involved because I'd done a cover for Brian Aldiss called Trillion Year Spree.
Hmm.
And he liked it very much and suggested to Stanley Kubrick that he might like to get me to work on doing production paintings. So I started producing various things like a sketch of the teddy bear and a sketch of there was an apartment in it because New York had flooded, the sea
Hmm.
levels had risen, and so I did a sketch of the actual this room looking out across the Hudson River to a flooded New York, and I was quite pleased with it really, and I thought it worked very well. Um, but it was really difficult to kind of tie him down. I think he was all over the place, really. Really, I um, I refused to talk about money
Hmm.
because he'd got in touch with me through my agent, and he kept asking me how much for a production painting of this,
Hmm.
and I was saying, well, I can't tell you that, because A, I don't know how long it's going to take.
Hmm.
And doing production paintings, you're going to be responsible for the entire look of the film. It's not something that I'm capable of uh, of coming up with really as a definitive figure.
Yeah.
So I said, you need to talk to my agent about it. They've got a much better idea.
Yeah.
And anyway, then the whole thing just kind of fizzled out. I don't really know what happened actually. The phone stopped ringing. Um, I was dealing with a guy called Tony Freewin, who was his assistant. And Tony Freewin was um, very sort of knowledgeable about facts and figures relating to what Stanley did on various films.
Yeah.
Um, for instance, in what's that, Full Metal Jacket
Yeah.
film he made, all the palm trees were planted in skips
Right.
and they moved them about. To, the whole thing was filmed in Docklands.
Oh, was it?
Yeah. Stanley refused to fly. He didn't like flying.
Right.
He was scared of the plane crashing.
Yeah.
So they planted all these palm trees in skips and then move them around to create the scene of
Right.
war-torn Vietnam. It's brilliant when you think about it.
It is.
But anyway, I digress. But they, on that particular film, AI, they eventually got a guy called, well, they went through, I think, at least three screenwriters, apart from Brian Aldiss. They had three others. And eventually they settled on a guy called Ian Watson,
Hmm.
who wrote basically a parody of, is it Pinocchio?
Yeah, a little boy wants to become a real human. I thought I
Yeah,
saw that comparison. Yeah.
it's a parody of Pinocchio.
Hmm.
And funnily enough, my wife rescued Ian Watson's daughter. She was very badly asthmatic. And we were at a convention in St. Helier on Jersey, and she had a really bad asthma attack.
Hmm.
And Katie just happened to be on tap, with me,
Yeah.
and took over completely and orchestrated this girl's medicines and everything, and got her out of her asthma attack.
Hmm.
Yeah, Ian Watson was very grateful. And whenever I see him at conventions now, he just smiles at me.
Well, going back to some TV series as well. So, didn't the your cover for a Philip K. Dick story, The Man in the High Castle, wasn't that reproduced on a DVD cover as well?
Um,
Without your permission, I mean, sorry,
no, it wasn't. No,
for the
uh,
TV series.
there was a TV series called Man in the High Castle with,
Yeah,
oh, I can't remember who was in it now. Um,
Rufus Sewell was in it.
sure, that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, they pinched the idea that I'd come up with this idea for the Statue of Liberty, but instead of holding a torch,
Hmm.
it's giving a Nazi salute.
Yeah.
It's in the book. The Axis powers win the Second World War,
Yeah.
and they take over. The Germans take over the eastern seaboard of the United States.
Hmm.
The Japanese take over the West, and it's all about the Nazis really taking over America. And
Yeah.
it's always been quite a good idea. Anyway, they nicked the idea and they produced their own version of the Statue of Liberty giving a Nazi salute. And they had they didn't have any. That was the thing that really annoyed me, was that they had no courage, because they wanted they put a sash
Hmm.
across the Statue of Liberty with a big swastika on it, and I didn't think it needed that.
No.
I thought that was too much,
Yeah.
and so that annoyed me. But I got mildly incensed by the fact that they'd pinched my idea. So I contacted my Association of Illustrators,
Yeah.
who consulted with solicitors, and they came back and said, "It's no go. You can't copyright an idea." Which that was the first time in
Yeah.
40 years
Hmm.
that had an issue had ever come up,
Right.
and I was completely amazed. You come up with an idea, and then somebody, oh, that's a good idea, we'll use that. That you've got no copyright on it.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's madness. It's like this thing with orphaned works. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, but explain for the viewers.
In the States, the powers that be were trying to introduce a database
Hmm.
whereby everybody that produced either a sculpture, a painting, an illustration, a photograph, or whatever it is, any form of visual art has to be placed on this database with a fee.
Right.
And that was your protection against breach of copyright.
Yeah.
So anybody wanting to use one of your pictures, if they go to this database and your picture's not on there, then they're free to use it.
Right.
It's outrageous. Absolutely outrageous, you know. What do they hell do they think they're doing? Anyway, again, I digress again, really, but
We did a cover for Douglas Adams as well, didn't you? Did you ever meet Douglas?
yes, I did. He was an intensely shy man, actually.
Mm.
But I went to his house in Islington, near the Angel,
Mm.
and with the editor, he told me exactly what he wanted,
Yeah.
which was exactly what I did.
Mm.
He gave me a photograph that a friend of his had taken of the Burren in Northern Ireland.
Mm.
Is it in Northern Ireland or is it in Eire?
I think it's in Northern Ireland.
Yeah. Anyway, there's this sort of limestone cast sort of landscape, and this friend of his had taken a sunset across this sort of cast limestone thing.
Mm.
But he wanted that with the sunset exactly as it was there. But he wanted a tea set floating in space
Yeah.
with a teacup and a saucer and a tea tray.
Right.
And then engraved in the tea tray was the title of the book,
Right.
The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I did. You know, that's what they wanted.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to waste my time trying to think of a better idea if that's what he wants. You
No.
know, you don't want to compete with Douglas Adams for ideas, really.
Well, what do you think about digital art? Because I know you've dabbled yourself, haven't you, quite extensively in painting on computers and illustration on computers.
Um, it's a different ball game, really. I mean, it's
Mm.
something you can talk to Fred about a lot, but it's more like sculpture. It's more like sculpture, really. You know,
Mm.
you especially using it for spaceships.
Yeah.
Um, you just sculpt this spaceship, put some engines on it,
Yeah.
and put some rocket flames coming out of the back, set it against a starry background, and you got
Yeah.
a cover, you know.
Mm. Do you think it's had a positive or negative effect on traditional illustration?
I got friends of mine in America who think it's the tool of the devil, actually.
Right.
And I've got some sympathy with that idea.
Mm.
I know Jim does a lot with Photoshop, doesn't use 3D.
3D. Yeah.
But the thing I did was I actually got somebody to come round and teach me how to use it.
Mm.
And I paid him, you know, quite a reasonable fee to come and show me what to do using 3D software.
Yeah.
And that was the only time it really made sense to me.
Yeah.
And you can make things look realistic by using, what was it called? Global illumination. I think I mentioned it when I spoke.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a lighting system, isn't it?
Yeah, you know, you can. give things a very realistic lighting.
Mm.
Takes longer to render out, but it's more realistic. So
Mm. You were quite active in conventions, weren't you, in recent years, going to conventions?
well, I wouldn't say so. I mean, I was on the odd panel and things like that, and I gave the odd talk and showed a
Yeah.
bunch of slides and things. But I was asked once to go to Chicago as a guest of honor.
Hmm.
WindyCon it was called. And the reason I was a guest of honor was that their other guest of honor was a guy called Christopher Moore,
Ah,
who was a writer, and he lives in Hawaii.
right.
So they got the two Chris Moores now. And it was a very sobering affair for me. I mean, they gave me some money, yeah, and they treated me like royalty, you know.
Mm.
They gave me $700, I think, to spend and picked me up from the airport in a chauffeur-driven limousine and all this kind of stuff. You know, it
Mm.
was. But when it came for me to give my talk, I went along towards the end of the previous talk and walked into the room, which was full of Klingons. There were hundreds of guys in there, all dressed as Klingons.
Right.
And they were being lectured by somebody who was talking in Klingon, dressed as a Klingon. And when I came in, like 250 Klingons turned around and looked at me, sort of like, who is this? He's not a Klingon, you know. Anyway, at the end of their talk, everybody left bar about 10 people.
Mhm.
So I gave my talk to about 10 people, one of whom was knitting in the front row. I didn't even get a scarf out of it. It was terrible.
Are there any projects that you wish you'd been asked to commission?
Um, Not really. I mean, to be honest, Sean, I haven't from 1972
Mm.
to 2010. I didn't take breath.
Yeah.
I had no time off. Just worked all the time. You know, I literally had. If I went on holiday, I'd literally have to say, right, I'm going on holiday at this point,
Yeah.
and everything would have to wait, and then I'd be straight back into it as soon as I got back.
Yeah.
So I had no real break in work. There were occasions when I had up to 25 different jobs lined up.
Right.
I was so busy, you know.
Yeah.
Um, so I didn't really have much time to think about. I think it would have been nice to work on that project, or I wish I'd done that, you know.
Yeah.
Um, there was a point where there was a film came up, and Fred put me forward for it, actually.
Fred
Um,
Gambino.
yeah,
Yeah.
Fred Bambino. And they went with John Harris instead, you know. Fair
Yeah.
enough, you know.
Mm.
Uh, I am denied as to whether I should do it really, because I wasn't all that keen on. Because you'd have to go to Seattle and be there for a month,
Yeah.
work in a studio with other people, and I mean I'd done things like that before. Gone to meetings where there was a thing that the BBC at one time where they were talking about producing a series based on Dan Dare.
Mm.
And they were going to have James Fox as
Mhm.
Dan, who would have
Right.
been perfect for it,
Yeah.
really. Um, but the whole thing just went up in smoke. It
Mm.
never materialized. So no, I'm happy with what I what I did really.
Yeah. Well, you've got an amazing body of work, haven't you? It's really extensive, and I've not seen a bad painting that you've ever done. So,
Well, a friend of mine once said to me something which I took to be an immense compliment, actually.
yeah,
Um, he said, "I've never seen anything that you've done that looks like you didn't try."
yeah,
You know,
yeah. I can agree with that.
and he added that I can always tell it's your work,
Yeah.
which is it's weird for me to hear that because in terms of what I produced, I
Mm.
always thought I was just doing a job. You
Yeah.
know, the handwriting that's part of your, if you like, that's recognizably your work. I was basically in total ignorance of.
Yeah, I think because there's a lot of generic science fiction art, isn't there? You can't, you can't tell who's actually painted it, but you can certainly tell with yours. There's definite style there. I can always recognize your work, or someone that says after Chris Moore, when they've obviously just used your style, tried to ape your style.
Well, it has happened, yeah.
Mm.
I did a cover once for Rick Wakeman cover, which featured it was it was called anamorphosen, which is Dutch for this particular thing. It's a distorted image.
Yeah.
And back in the medieval times, they used to produce these images, and you could view them through a polished pewter tankard.
Mm.
And the distortion of the tankard redistorted the image
Mm.
to look like reality.
Yeah.
And Rick wanted a picture of himself like this. So I did this picture, and it went to Los Angeles, where there were big posters of it saying, "See this sleeve come alive," and all this stuff.
Mm.
And it was sold with um, a sheet of melamine paper that you rolled up into, like mirror paper, that you roll up into a sheet.
Mm.
But I once saw, I think it was Practical Photography magazine, and they got this picture,
Mm.
and they were offering four free rolls of film for anybody who could tell them how this photograph was produced.
Brilliant. Well,
No,
thanks again, Chris. It's been a really interesting chat. Thank you for joining us again.
it was my pleasure, my pleasure. There was another time when one of my covers actually wound up on the wall of the set for Top of the Pops.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't tell you about that before,
No.
but yeah, my kids were watching it. Robbie and William were watching it, and they suddenly rushed into the kitchen and went, "Here, Dad, Dad, Dad! There's one of your pictures on the telly. On the quick, quick!" So I rushed through to the lounge, and sure enough, one entire wall of the studio was um, a, a big um, backdrop of a cover I did called Ringworld by Larry Niven.
Yeah.
And I thought, bastards, sodding cheating gits. Anyway, I quickly slapped a CD, a VHS thing in the thing and recorded it, and contacted my agent and said, the BBC have been using my imagery on Top of the Pops.
Yeah.
It's got to be worth thousands, that. So my agent got on to a solicitor, who contacted the BBC, and the BBC, well, we bought it from a company called Scene Doc in North London, and so it's them you should be
Chasing.
chasing for money, you know. So the solicitor came back and said, well, the BBC are still in breach of copyright,
Yeah.
so they should still pay you for the usage of it, you know.
Yeah.
So the solicitor's fee was, I think, 450 quid.
Yeah.
And we got a fee from the BBC, who admitted that they had to use it. And they paid what they normally paid for the use of this scene was 425 quid.
So you were down on the deal.
So that's what they paid me, 425 quid. Anyway, so there you are, you know.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Chris. Nice chatting to you again, and I'll let you know on the interviews on the webpage.
Thank you, and take care.
You too. Thank you, mate. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.